We know more about Arab culture as a result of the Persian Gulf crisis, but probably we don't know enough yet. Understanding the daily lives of the people of the Middle East can go a long way towards helping us understand the whole picture in that part of the world. We'll be looking this morning at the internal problems that affect the people of the Arab countries and the way they look at the rest of the world. With us is Laila Abou-Saif, an Egyptian Coptic Christian who's lived in the Arab world for most of her life. She's a well-known theater director and film director in Egypt, and she's taught here in the United States at Harvard, UCLA, Columbia, and Stanford. And she's written a book called Middle East Journal, which is a woman's journey into the heart of the Arab world. Ms. Abou-Saif, welcome. Earlier in the day, Saddam Hussein issued another televised call for a jihad, saying that his struggle with the West is really a Muslim religious war. I'm wondering, among the Muslims of Egypt, and they're the overwhelming majority, does this resonate with credibility?
When he uses the word jihad, he's using it as a Ba'athist, a leader of Arab socialism, and therefore by extension Arab nationalism. So it doesn't have the same ring as it would have if it were pronounced by a member of the Muslim Brotherhood or a member of the group Al-Jihad, who are religious extremists. He is not a religious extremist. He likes to think of himself as a progressive Arab nationalist. And so the call of jihad here is, in my interpretation, the call not for a religious war so much as a call for a war of the Arabs against the Western imperialists, the Western interventionists who have occupied the Middle East since World War I, who've chopped up the present map of the Middle East, what it is, who created the artificial state of Kuwait, which they created after World War I, and who decapitated, from his point of view, Iraq by taking away Kuwait, which was part of the Iraqi Ottoman. Geographically speaking, Kuwait was part of the Iraq at the time of the Ottomans in the 19th century. It was only the British who created Kuwait by creating an artificial boundary between Kuwait and Iraq. And just to mention this, I'd like to say that the Iraqis tried twice before to annex Kuwait, once in 1961 and once in 1972. This is the third time they tried to do this. They considered their legitimate territory. So what I'm trying to say is it's not a holy war in the sense which is let's fight the Muslims, let's fight the Christian infidels. It is a war to reunite the Arabs again, with the banner of Arab nationalism, which is a very appealing one in view of the fact that Arab nationalism here, as he sees it, as Saddam Hussein sees it, if I may say so, means fighting against the occupation of Israel, of the occupation of Israel of the Palestinian.
The Arab leader of our times, who I think most successfully embodied that pan-Arab movement, was Gamal Abdel Nasser of Egypt. And he succeeded in transcending borders. He was an Egyptian, but in Syria, in Iraq, throughout the Arab world, he was our guy. He wasn't a foreigner.
Right.
Has Saddam Hussein transcended Iraq's borders in that way, or in Egypt is he still regarded as primarily an Iraqi rather than an all-Arab leader?
In Egypt, he is not popular. The Egyptians are firmly behind Mubarak. He's only popular with the Muslim Brotherhood and with a very small faction of the Labour Party. But even the opposition in Egypt has aligned itself firmly with Mubarak and his stance on the invasion of Kuwait.
Even some of the leaders of the Muslim Brotherhood have been extremely skeptical of Saddam's claims, and I guess part of the problem is that with his natural allies in the fundamentalist movement and in the labor movement and on the left, is that a lot of the real working class people who know Iraq, the Egyptians who have worked in Iraq,
and don't like
have the most negative view of Saddam and his country.
Precisely, and we heard a couple of months ago that there were 1,000 Egyptian corpses which were returned from Baghdad of workers there who had simply been murdered by returning soldiers from the war, who returned, found these Egyptians in their jobs and simply murdered them. So we don't have a very happy relationship with Iraq, and there is a resentment by the million or so workers who worked in Iraq over the past 10 years or more. There is a resentment of the Iraqi boss or the culture as it treats Egyptians. But I think one must not underestimate the appeal that Saddam could have, even in Egypt, if he rallied around the call of Arab unity, Arab nationalism, freedom from the Western, not the Christian, the Western invader who has colonized our oil for 50 years and now wishes to colonize it again. These are all messages which would be very appealing to any Arab masses.
There would be messages, I would think, also that would be extremely dangerous to Hosni Mubarak, since he has allied himself with the West and has even sent Egyptian troops to Saudi Arabia as part of what I would guess is viewed by most Egyptians as a Western rather than an Arab mission to protect the Saudis.
Well, not necessarily. What Hosni Mubarak did was what Egypt did traditionally in this particular dispute. In 61 and 72, Egypt called meetings of the Arab League, and which is there to settle disputes between Arab countries, and said, let's settle this amongst ourselves as Arab brothers. He played that role. There was nothing pro-Western in that role. He said, first of all, let's settle the matter between ourselves behind closed doors. And this apparently is what they did, and the consensus was that there would be a condemnation of the Iraqi position. So that was not considered in Egypt as a pro-Western stance. But sending troops to fight alongside America, yes, that is considered, in a sense, pro-Western, if you wish. But then in Egypt, we consider the Americans our friends. We know that we rely heavily on the U.S. for subsidies, and there is no great anti-American feeling there. As a matter of fact,
well, I guess any relationship of friendship, which also involves reliance and in some cases dependence, can beget at least ambivalence about the relationship. We'll talk about that next when CBS News Nightwatch continues.
Still to come on Night Watch, more on the Arab view. Schools, to choose or not to choose. What priority education? Shogun on stage. And risky sex. Now in Washington, here is CBS News Night Watch guest host, Dave Marash.
Welcome back. We are visiting with Laila Abou-Saif, whose new book, Middle East Journal, is a chronicle of months that she spent, as she says, at the heart of the Arab world. One of the big headline stories in American-Egyptian relations involves the $7 billion in mostly military debt that the Egyptians owe the United States, and President Bush's desire to wipe that clean as a kind of thank you for President Mubarak's cooperation in the Gulf exercise. I'm wondering, on the streets of Cairo, is this $7 billion worth of forgiveness seen as a symbol of President Mubarak's strength or as a symbol of his weakness and dependence on the United States?
No, really, I think it would be seen as an indication of his strength and of his new military alliance with the United States. After all, the $7 billion is for arms, and we are fighting there, and maybe there will be a heavier dependency on Arab and Egyptian forces to fight against Iraq in the future. So we see it as a sign of Mubarak's strength, not on his reliance or weakness in his dependency on the United States. As a matter of fact, Mubarak's image has changed quite remarkably in the past 3 weeks. We used to refer to him as Rais, the boss. Now we refer to him as Al-Zaim, the leader.
A remarkable transition,
yes,
indeed.
yes.
You know, the question that's always asked about American policy in the Gulf is, will the United States stay the course? Will the American public have the patience to support a military policy that's likely to take months or even years to come to fruition? I'd like to ask the same question of the Egyptian population. Will they stay the course? Do they have the patience to send Egyptian boys overseas to Saudi Arabia for months or even years at a time?
If it is put into the correct political context, I think the Egyptians will be willing to fight, because to many Muslims and Arabs and Christians, just people in the Middle East, the takeover of Kuwait, the invasion of Kuwait, is an act of usurpation, it's a rape. And they see it, feel very strongly about one Muslim fighting another Muslim. And this is painful to them. And they see that this has to be rectified, made put right, that the Muslims have to, or the Arabs, if I may say so, have to stop fighting each other, because we have a much more important thing to do, which is to liberate the Palestinian occupied territories.
You note what seems to me to be the sort of central heartbreak of Middle East Journal, that, and again it relates to what we were just talking about, $7 billion in military debt for a country that has devastating poverty, that has millions of people who literally don't have enough to eat or don't have shelter. Hundreds of thousands literally living in cemeteries in Cairo.
Yes, and a 30% rate of inflation. This is not a government statistic, but we have a very strong rate of inflation.
Given that poverty, it seems almost ludicrous that, as you say, we in Egypt are a military society. Syria is a military society. Iraq is a military society. Israel is a military society. Our whole society has become defined by a state of now cold but all too frequently hot war.
I don't understand your question. What is the question that you're asking me?
Well, I guess I don't even know that it is a question. I guess
I have a comment, if I may.
I was hoping to get.
So my comment is, who has put these military regimes where they are? And a small addition to my comment would be the United States, of course. It's the United States that's propped up all these military regimes. You were a great friend of Saddam Hussein. You were backing him financially after the Iran-Iraq war, helping him to build up his society. I mean, it was going to be the start of a new great friendship.
We always justify this by claiming that these military regimes, if they do nothing else, bring stability with them. You look skeptical, to say the least.
Well, I mean, I live in the United States, and I'm not exactly pro-military regimes, needless to say. I mean, I believe in democracy, otherwise I wouldn't be here. And I am a little bit saddened by the fact that the United States will sell arms to these countries and not ideas. I mean, why not send some of the ideas and principles of this, democracy alongside with the F-16s is my question as a woman and as someone who is really concerned about freedom. Obviously, in a military society, you cannot have the kind of freedoms and human rights and constitutional rights that people enjoy in the United States.
Earlier in the week, the Soviet Foreign Minister Eduard Shevardnadze made a suggestion that apparently sent chills down the spines at the State Department, which was that there ought to be an international conference to try and solve not just the Gulf crisis, but the Israeli-Palestinian crisis as part of the same crisis.
So it's a
I
package.
take it you would find that to be very cogent analysis.
Yes, of course, absolutely. I mean, it's a generic link between the Gulf crisis and the Arab-Israeli conflict are generically and always have been linked together. I mean, don't forget the Arabs have used the oil weapon in 1973 to pressure Israel to withdraw from the occupied territories and from East Jerusalem. It didn't work, but the oil was used as a weapon, and I think somewhere in the game that Saddam Hussein is playing, he's also using the oil weapon as a political tool to pressure for Israel, because he's very close to the PLO, to the Palestinian cause. Baghdad and the PLO have been close, very close, since 1968. There's been this is a very firm relationship between Baghdad and the Palestinians.
There are a lot of Americans who feel that Saddam Hussein is just one Arab politician who has used the Palestinian and Israeli crisis as a kind of handkerchief to cover his own crimes.
Well, let's say this. The problem of the Arab-Israeli conflict, unresolved as it is now, will always be used by one or the other Arab politician, because it exists. It has to stop existing as a conflict. Then it will no longer be used.
Laila Abou-Saif, thank you for joining us. A most interesting conversation. CBS News Nightwatch continues right after this.